Welcome to the De-Escalation Techniques for a Mental Health Crisis Competency. This course offers entry-level practitioners the skills needed in order to handle tough scenarios in which a client may be experiencing a mental health crisis. Key concepts such as de-escalation techniques within this module are founded on resources provided by the National Alliance on Mental Illnesses, otherwise known as NAMI, and the Crisis Interventions Teams, known as CIT. NAMI is known as the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for the millions of Americans affected by mental illnesses. An alliance of over 600 state organizations and local affiliates work to ensure that every person affected by mental illness has access to services they need and is surrounded by a community that cares. CIT programs are community-based programs that bring together law enforcement, mental health professionals, mental health advocates, as well as people living with mental illnesses and their families, and other partners to improve community responses to mental health crisis. As a reminder, these modules serve as a tool to de-escalate a situation in which a client is experiencing a mental health crisis. This is not a crash course on what mental health diagnosis currently exists, nor serve in any form to diagnose any individual. By the end of this module, the learner will be able to analyze a mental health crisis and apply de-escalation techniques to a performed scenario. Throughout this module includes defining what a mental health crisis is, identifying the causes of mental health crisis, recognizing what a mental health crisis looks like, comprehending the components of de-escalation, and practicing using the CAF model for de-escalation scenarios. A mental health illness or crisis can occur to any individual, regardless of age, gender, or ethnicity. In fact, according to NAMI, 1 in 5 adults experience mental illnesses within a given year. Up to 20.2 million adults experienced a substance use disorder, with 10.2 million having co-occurring conditions. 1 in 5 youth aged 13 to 18 have experienced a severe mental health condition at some point during their life, and for those aged 8 to 15, that estimate is approximately 13%. When it comes to our homeless population, 46% of adults staying in shelters report having a mental illness and/or substance use disorder. When it comes to our incarcerated, 20% of the state prisoners and 20% of local jail prisoners have a recent history of a mental health condition. And 70% of youth in the juvenile justice system report having at least one mental health condition. 60% of all adults and almost 50% of all youth ages 8 through 15 with a mental illness received no mental health services within the previous year. African Americans and Hispanic Americans are reported to use mental health services at about half the rate of Caucasian Americans, whereas Asian Americans are about 1/3. 50% of adults with mental illness report experiencing symptoms prior to the age of 14, with 75% prior to the age of 24. Defining a mental health crisis. A crisis, by definition, is a short-term, overwhelming disruption of a person's typical state of mind, where the usual methods of coping and problem-solving no longer work. A mental health crisis is any situation in which a person's behavior puts them at risk of hurting themselves or others, as well as inhibits them from caring for themselves or functioning effectively and safely within society. A crisis can occur to anyone at any time. It does not occur to just those with a mental illness. Many triggers can lead to crisis, including home or environmental stressors, such as changes in relationship with others, perhaps a breakup or a divorce, losses of any kind due to death, estrangement, or relocation, conflicts or arguments with loved ones or friends, any type of trauma such as violence or assault, a near-death experience, a natural disaster, terrorism or abuse, school or work-related stressors such as extensively worrying about upcoming projects or tasks, feeling singled out by coworkers or peers, feeling lonely, lack of understanding from peers, coworkers, teachers, or supervisors, experiencing real or perceived discrimination, failing grades or losing a job. Other stressors may also include being in crowds or a busy environment, pending court dates, using or abusing drug or alcohol, starting new medication, or adjusting current medication. Current treatments stop working, or medication is being missed or stopped altogether. It is vital to understand the differences between a sign and a symptom. For example, a sign is objective in nature. It is something we can see and observe. A symptom, on the other hand, is subjective and is based on the client's perspective. In other words, I can see the client crying. This is a sign. The client then expresses feelings of being overwhelmed and anxious. This is a symptom. It is also crucial to know the warning signs aren't always present when a mental health crisis is developing. However, common behaviors or signs and symptoms to look out for include an individual may seem confused or disoriented. They may answer questions inappropriately or in a way that doesn't make sense. He or she may demonstrate rapid or intense mood swings, including sudden increased energy levels or inability to stay still. They may even appear suddenly happy or calm after a period of depression, or sudden intense episodes of a euphoric feeling, indicating mania. Additionally, he or she might even appear suddenly sad or depressed or withdrawn, including isolating themselves from work, school, family, or friends. They might demonstrate increased agitation, violence, or out of control behaviors. This may also include destroying property, breaking things, including their own, or giving verbal threats. Abusive behaviors to self and others may also exist, including drug and alcohol abuse or self-harm. Paranoia may also be present. The inability to perform simple or daily tasks, such as maintaining hygiene or changing their clothes, may be evident. He or she may lose touch with reality, is unable to recognize family or friends, presents strange ideas, fails to understand what they are saying, may hear voices, or see hallucinations, often indicating psychosis. Now that we have defined what a mental health crisis is and identified the signs and symptoms associated with a potential mental health crisis, watch the next two short videos to start by seeing if you can recognize any behaviors that are present. Take your time to focus on the gestures, facial expressions, and overall body language. What did you see? What observations were you able to notice? In the first video, we can see the gentleman was banging on the door, closing his eyes, sitting on the floor with his hands on his head, and breathing rapidly. In the second video, we could see him clenching his fist, closing his eyes tightly, leaning his head on his arm, and banging on the glass. Now that we have discussed a few of the behaviors we observed, let's consider the potential outcomes. This is where our clinical eye is crucial in order to appropriately assess the potential signs and symptoms based on those current observations. Let's reflect back on the videos. What signs and symptoms could you recognize? Take a moment to think. If your answers were anger or agitation for the first video, you're correct. It's good to be attentive to these behaviors before they escalate to something further, such as violence or abuse. For the second video, if your answers were sadness or depression, you are also correct. In this case, it's good to recognize these signs and symptoms before they turn into something more, such as withdrawal or suicidal ideation. Helping others starts with knowing yourself. In any situation, the only thing we have complete control over is ourselves. We work in a profession filled with vulnerable clients. Therefore, successful de-escalation begins with us, our attitudes, our beliefs, and our actions. Maintaining a calm, non-judgmental yet strong stance is key. If we don't have good self-awareness or self-control, we may project our own positive or negative feelings onto the individual in the midst of a crisis. Take a moment to reflect. Do you have any potential triggers or sensitivities? Do you think you can overcome your own personal feelings or thoughts in order to put the client first? Remember, part of having self-control and awareness is knowing your limits and trying not to take things personally, as well as not establishing a power struggle in the midst of someone's crisis. When assessing the situation, one must pay attention to the environment, the behaviors of the individual in crisis, and the safety risks potentially involved. One must determine whether the person is in danger of hurting themselves, others, or property. Determine if they need emergency assistance. Even asking the individual directly can be appropriate. If the individual has already de-escalated to the point of harming himself or others, the emergency response team must be activated by dialing 911. If there's enough time, determine if you need to call a mental health professional for guidance and support. The key components for successful de-escalation include using a clear and calm tone of voice when talking, maintaining a safe distance, 5 to 6 feet is recommended, be aware of body language, use relaxed, well-balanced, non-threatening postures while still maintaining a strong tactical awareness. Be aware that particular uniforms or tools can be intimidating to the individual in crisis. Therefore, if possible, remove any distractions, disruptions, or upsetting influences. Recognizing that the person in crisis may be overwhelmed by sensations, thoughts, frightening beliefs, sounds, and environment. Therefore, provide careful explanations, instructions, and remove them from the environment if possible. Be in the present moment and use active listening skills throughout the process. Use a here and now focus. Use I statements that are objective and fact-based, such as, I can see you're upset. state that you are there to help, as well as restating or feeding back facts that the person in crisis is relaying. For example, your client may state, "I really messed up. I'm so sad. My girl kicked me out, and I'm afraid of sleeping in the car. I can't even get a room without money." An appropriate response might be, "Let me see if I understand. You're feeling scared and depressed because your partner kicked you out, and you don't have any money or a place to stay?" These reflective moments allow for the person in crisis to feel truly heard and understood, thus creating trust and allowing for better chances for the individual in crisis to receive help. When engaging with the individual, be sure to set limits and be consistent throughout the process. Be sure during your engagement you find ways to validate and accept the individual. It is always acceptable to take moments to pause or reflect in the silence, as it lets you and the individual to stop and think. It is also important to recognize validation is not the same as sympathizing or empathizing. We don't want to feel pity or sorry for the individual. Rather, we want to ensure the individual's feelings and perceptions are recognized, as well as affirming that their opinions matter and are worthy of being heard. When using these strategies, be absolutely sure not to make any promises you cannot keep. In most cases, it is safer to not make any promises at all. Body language is even more pronounced when speaking with individuals in the midst of a mental health crisis. The focus of our communication efforts should be based on 10% words, 20% tone, and 70% body language. In order for a message to be clear, the meaning of the words must match the tone of voice and body language. The right words said with a genuine concern for the individual in the midst of a crisis is your most powerful tool for preventing escalating behaviors. Without sincerity, it can make things worse. When thinking of using your newly established de-escalating techniques, consider using the CAF model to expedite your thinking process. CAF stands for calm, assess, facilitate. Calm meaning to decrease emotional behavior and mental intensity of the situation. Assess means to determine the most appropriate response as presented by the facts. And to facilitate means to promote the most appropriate resolution based on the assessment of the facts presented. Now that we've gone through the components of de-escalation, let's understand the logic behind these strategies. The overarching theme is, if we take a less authoritative, less controlling, and less confrontational approach, we actually provide more control for the individual being affected by a mental health crisis. Our goal is to try to give the person affected a sense that he or she has some sort of control of the situation. Why is this so important? Because they are in a mental health crisis, and by definition, they are feeling out of control. The individual's normal coping measures are no longer working at this time. Therefore, it is our goal to help them gain as much of a sense of control that they can in order to de-escalate and prevent further harm. Now, let's put it to practice. In the next following slides, you will be presented with scenarios consisting of a video to observe the behaviors of a person in crisis and a short case study to further describe the situation at hand. Take your time to read through the case and watch the video. Think of what possible de-escalation strategies you could use with your client to prevent further escalation. Following will be a brief description on what strategies could be potentially used. Therefore, compare your thoughts to the suggested strategies. This concludes our competency module. Thank you. Remember, it is always good to be vigilant of the clients you work with. Anyone is susceptible to experiencing a mental health crisis. Additionally, check with your company and organization to see if they have specific policies on the matter. And if possible, work with your team to ensure you are aware of community resources available within your surrounding area. At the end of this module, you may contact your competency instructor in order to take the competency quiz. An 80% or greater is required to pass. Thank you.